Welcome to It's Art, Let's Talk About It, a podcast sponsored by the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. Located in the heart of the Texas Hill Country, the museum is dedicated to the preservation and promotion of the American West, especially through the art of the West. In this podcast series, we will visit with artists, art collectors, and gallery directors working in the Western art genre. We'll talk about the history and heritage of Western art, and we'll talk about why talking about Western art is so important. I'm Darrell, the Executive Director of the museum, and I'll be your host for It's Art, Let's Talk About It. The podcast is a member of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.
In this episode, we have part 2 of Darrell's interview with Quang and Scott Christensen. If you haven't checked out part 1, we encourage you to do so as well. I know you'll enjoy this episode.
Before we get into Q&A, which we've scheduled here in about 5 minutes, so start formulating your questions. I want to talk about some individual works, one by Quang and then one by Scott, some pieces that have just really changed my look at their works. One by Quang that I was particularly taken with from first minute was the piece at the very back or front of this room, which is the fantasy arrangement.
Yes.
We even use that on the cover of the book. For those of you in the book, it's on page, I don't remember. But it's just fascinating because that's such a chaotic, beautifully done portrait of something we see every day. See a lot of artists try to talk about. But the one that, but you can talk about that one if you want to, but the one that just shook me to my core was Three Sisters. The big painting that's in the gallery against the big blue painting that's in the gallery. And I'd seen the image, and we had the book. We produced the book a month or so. I'd send it to, and I got to the studio, and it's not framed. Right? It's not framed. And I'm thinking, wait a second, okay. And then he started talking about how painting sometimes, like the forest floor here, you love that substrate. Just put it up there, paint on it, let it happen. Talk about Three Sisters. That painting kind of evolved.
Oh, yes. About, I don't know how many years ago, 15, 20 years ago, I threw a model in a pool. I lived in a condo in Denver, and we have this sad little pool. And I said, hey, would you jump in there and let me take some photos?
You didn't throw her in the pool. You asked her to get in.
Yeah, I pushed her in. But it was really, the photos came back so beautiful and so eerie that I didn't really know how to paint it. So I took another series where I jumped in the water. And took it with a GoPro and got underneath her, and she was wearing a dress, so it just looks like a jellyfish. So I got all that back, and after about 5 years, I painted my first one, and then another 10 years later, before I actually liked a painting, and then it evolved into all of that. But this painting, I usually do a single figure. In this case, I thought it would be kind of fun to do 3 shapes, and it was kind of made up. Half of it is really invented. But halfway through the painting, a collector in Pennsylvania came over, and he saw it, and his wife saw it, and she loved it. And she came home and told her husband, I got to have that. So he came over and bought it before I was done. And I'm like, I don't want any money because I don't know if this is going to turn out. And in fact, after he said that, it became like, so I became a little too careful. And to his credit, he came over and he saw it and says, look, listen, he has 3 daughters. And he says, wow, that could represent my 3 daughters. And fine idea, but then I started to try to make it look like the 3 daughters, which is a bad idea. And he recognized that, and he came over and said, no, look, I don't need that. Adrian did a beautiful portrait of all the children. So we already have that. I want you to just do your thing. And he got the monkey off my back, and I went and attacked it again.
And he decided he didn't want it framed. He wants to hang it just like that.
Yeah, he's going to hang it in his Paris apartment, just like that, tack it up like that. But I love the raw, like that painting. Look at the raw edges around that.
Forest floor.
Yeah, and the drips and everything, and I kind of like it.
And then for those of you listening to the podcast, we'll have photographs. And then, of course, you can click on the link to the book, copyright image across all of the pages so that people don't steal from us on that. But you can flip catalog is what we call it. It's out there. And or the book. These images are all in there. But Three Sisters shook me, especially when I saw it raw. And my first thing was, it's not framed. Where's your frame? You were going to hand me a frame. We were going to have to frame this thing. And he said, no, I want it hung just like that. And it just kind of went, ooh, this is so cool. And then the question is, how the hell do you hang it? And that's a magnet system. If anybody wants, I'll sell you the secret to all of that. But the paintings like that one we used on the cover, the Three Sisters, which was so typical Quang for me. The nudes was a different thing. This may be the first show in the history of the Museum of Western Art where we've had nudes. Generally, you don't see cowgirls in chaps butt naked, right? I mean, it's...
What a great idea.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great? But there are 12 nudes in this show, and that's a real unique step. It's a big step for the museum, but they work so well, and it's so beautifully done, the nudes. And so the body of work that Quang presented to us, again, is the 50 personalities. We never knew what was going to happen, but, pieces like albacore hunters, whatever that's called, the abalone, the seashell piece, Liam's dream, their little boy. I've seen the floor, and I've seen Liam, and I know exactly where he was laying, on the concrete floor. And Quang took that and turned it into a painting that's ethereal and beautiful and wonderful.
I wanted to make a quick statement that each painting that you see in here is a different experience. You know what I mean? So the abalone hunter, for example, was Adrian and I drove through Mendocino, California, and there was a beach right there. And we stopped, and as we walked out, we saw these abalone shells, which are like, you never see them, they're so rare. And the gulls were eating them. And I remember watching in amazement as they were as they walked around, the color of them and the rocks and the pebbles and the stuff all kind of melted together. It was like this moving tapestry where nothing stood out. It's just they all melted together. You call it visual connection. And that stayed in my mind, and I just took some videos with my iPhone. But 5 years or more later, I painted it. I painted that experience.
So you live with painting a long time. I mean, an image, a thought.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes evolves over years.
Yes.
Even.
Yes.
So file it away and do it.
Yeah, and just like this painting of the forest floor. So in Pennsylvania, in the fall, all the leaves come down. And if you take a walk in the forest, you can't imagine not only the texture and the crunch, but if you stopped and looked, it's infinite amount of colors and shapes and texture.
And it's not entirely accurate, but I've told people, I said, that if you want to understand the difference between Scott and Quang, is that they might walk up to the same forest at the same time, and Scott paints a painting like this one behind us, the Wind River, and Quang may look down at the forest floor and go, oh, cool, and go to painting that. It's a different approach, right? Different perspectives.
Oh, totally, yeah.
On the same basic subject. And about Scott's work, because this started with Scott before Quang ever got involved, I was always fascinated by the bigness, the grandness of the Thomas Moran, the Bierstadt, the church, the guys at the Hudson River School, and a connection that I felt with him when I walk up. I've stood on that stream. I didn't know it, but I see Scott's. I traveled through Montana and Wyoming recently, and I'd send him emails of, hey, here's a Scott Christensen painting. Boom. Yeah. And it's big stuff, Scott. It seems like it's grand. Again, the depth of it. Two that I want to talk about real quickly is, of course, the Fremont Lake piece that's there at the very end of the piece. And we used it on the cover, a swath of it on the cover, so y'all can look at that. And that's a piece that just fascinated me, and I want you to talk about the depth of that painting, and then the majesty of any one of these other big scenes. And how did you get there? How did you get to these paintings?
They all start with a thought, and it's more, you might be surprised, but say that fall scene in the background, there's a place I love to go in Pinedale, Wyoming, and I went there and I saw this scene. I just loved the view from the cabin. And the problem is I don't like yellow all that much.
You don't like what?
Yellow all that much. Yellow can be terribly done. It can be really difficult, yes. And to me, those were just and I have this conversation with myself out there then, like, how can you paint a lot of yellow and make this work? Because I want to see if I can. I had to increase the cools to make that happen. And I've had to do other things. The depth in the water, give it a little bit more volume. It helped give me a little more space there. But it was really, that whole thing was about how warm can I actually paint those yellows that I see and actually make them read. That's how it started. And then I'm worried about the painting.
It was an experiment in how to overcome yellow.
I pushed those things for myself.
So push that envelope with your yellows. It's something you don't traditionally do.
Exactly.
Talk about this piece back here, because what you told me about this piece and some of the other big grand pieces.
Yeah.
I love the piece over here where the rattlesnakes, you guys, is that the one?
Yeah, that's her.
I don't know the title, remember the title of it, but.
We were up on this one, North Fork Canyon in Lander, and I'd known this area because I lived in Lander. And this place is a private property, and it was close to these rock walls. And Gene and I were walking to go paint, and we'd come across one rattlesnake after another, and finally we kind of panicked. We said, we got to get out of here. And the only way down was to this spot.
Painters attacked by rattlesnakes. That's the headline.
After a while, it freaks you out because you hear these noises and you can't tell where they're at.
Oh, jeez.
And this one with the logs in the water. And Gene started. Anyway, we had the packs on with our painting gear, and we're headed down to this spot, and it's kind of a scree, like slick, with a lot of rock that rolls. And Gene's headed down, and he kind of gets on his ass so he doesn't go too fast, because it's going to go down, and you might be just like, bye. But Gene's sliding down, and he flips his finger up like this. He's known to do things
And
like
for
that.
those of you listening on the radio, that was a visual cue what Gene did on that deal.
You're lucky he didn't get naked
Oh, man.
on you. I know, Gene.
He got to the water, and the dance had started. Yeah.
Let's talk about the High Wind River.
The High Wind River.
High Wind River.
Yeah, I had the cabin. I have a cabin that was up in the mountains there, and I used to take my kids up there all the time, and in the summer and fall, and I'd spend months up there painting on occasion. But these hikes up in the Wind Rivers. There's over 3,000 lakes in the mountains up there, and it's just great. We'd take horses in, and Chuck Rawle, who's here, and Gene and I and some other people would go up and have these horses take us in, and then we put the backpacks on and walk and just go different angles to the peaks. One of the things I love about being outdoors is when you're coming up over a crest and you're wondering where's the lake at, right? And that's what this one is to me. This is a scene from the background is totally reinvented the foreground. Because I want the experience of that rock that's almost chaotic.
And that's one of the things I wanted to mention. I mean, so my mental list of questions. I was standing in this gallery with the great Robert Pummel, who's a landscapist, a Western artist, and a lady walks up during his show and said, "Oh, I know exactly where that is, that barn. I know exactly where that scene is." And she described how her family used to go to picnics in that very place. She walked off. He said, "Thank you," and they had a conversation, and she walked off, and I said, "Is that true?" And he said, "It's not even close." He said that barn is in Fredericksburg, and that wall is in Pennsylvania, and that tree's out in West Texas. And how much of that do you do?
Quite often, yeah. I don't.
So you're not just painting, and that's something I want young people, young artists especially, to understand. And we've had that conversation, right? Several of us. Edit. Put together your best thoughts on the things. So is that a part of what you do?
Yeah, and I'll add chaos to it, and then see if I can manage it. I like the chaos of those high peaks when you're starting to walk up there and there's just rocks everywhere, and you're going, how do I do that? Can I even manage it? And sometimes I overmanage it, and I have to come back and redo everything, sand it down, and try it again. But I like doing that. To me, I want to make it all fit so that it has a connectivity of sorts, but variety the whole time, if I can.
And I think I know the answer in Quang's case is, a lot of it is imagination.
Yes.
I mean, it's not more and more, it's not what you're seeing. How many and let's just take the nude that's behind us over here, this lovely piece that a friend of mine just recently purchased from you.
Right.
And it's such a beautiful painting, and she's picking her way through the stream, through the rocks. Was she actually there, or was that added? I mean, is that one scene, or is that a culmination of a lot of different scenes?
That's a great question. So the other things besides throwing nudes into pools, I take them out into the forest and I take photos and shoot them, as they say. So this model is such a great sport. Yeah, so we found some places in Colorado, it was remote enough. And I said, just act natural, like you just wander around, like you're Eve, just waking up from the sleep. And so I took all these photos. So if you saw the photo I painted from, she's actually fully lit in sunlight. Okay. And the rock around her was lit in sunlight. But I did a little sketch. You had a table here yesterday. With
it's over here somewhere. I think.
So there's a little itty-bitty sketch in there where I sketched the idea for the big picture. So I decided to sketch it so that there's just a strip of light above the composition, and most of it is in shadow. So I put her in shadow except for a little light on her back. And I liked that composition, and then I painted it according to that.
Cool.
See? But then this piece here is entirely imaginary. Actually, the model was in my studio, and there was a series of shots that I took maybe 8, 9, 10 years
We're talking about Susanna and the Elders,
right. And
which has recently been purchased by a friend of mine. We're very excited about that.
I'm very excited that's going to, because I love that painting, and it's so different.
That's a made-up scene, right? I mean, she was in a studio. You added.
The pose was very dynamic. It was in my studio, and I thought, how could I paint this? And I imagine it was Susanna and the elders, which is a biblical story, how she was surprised by the elders sneaking up on her while she was bathing. And so I invented this whole landscape, and I made them into these 3 creepy faces hiding in the leaves coming out, and so I integrated them into the leaves.
It's a masterful piece.
Yeah. So anyway.
And I've been remiss about it, but we're supposed to mention every 15 minutes that this is a podcast, the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network here in Kerrville, Texas. It's art. Let's talk about it. And so that's what we've been doing, right, is talking about art. It's come to that point in our show. We're going to try to do it. If you've got a question and you can say it loudly enough that we can hear it up here, I won't have to bring the microphone down. And Aaron Yates, our audio expert guy, is going to tell me yes or no on that. Or can you get another? Well, okay, so we're going to get a mic to pass around in the audience. But start formulating your questions. And if somebody's got one right now, raise your hand. Yes, sir. Let's go ahead and ask that if you can do it boldly. So the question is for Quang.
No.
I don't know if it's working or not.
Yeah.
But I love obviously I love all the paintings. But the one in the corner, that raptor.
It's called Raptor? Uh-huh.
Yes. Beautiful edges, everything. But what were you thinking? I'm just wondering. It's Sam, by the way.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering how you came up with that.
Yes.
And Raptor, for those of you in the book, we chose to put it in there. That was one of those that when we put it on the wall, there were people in, okay. Because it's a bold step for the Museum of Western Art.
Yeah.
But that's a step we wanted to take.
So, to your credit.
To talk about Raptor.
It was, yes. I'm not a narrative painter. That's about as narrative of a painting as you'll ever get from me, because that has a story behind it. Raptor is an interesting idea, because I had another time a model sit in my studio who came, and I do figurative paintings, try to put them into. When I paint a figure, it's never just a figure, it's always within an environment. I had an Indian friend of mine, American Indian, gave me the owl. It's an owl. And he found it hanging off a tree dead. And he said, Quang, you should paint this. And I said, oh, cool. So he handed it to me. He said, but if anybody asks, your American Indian friend gave it to you to borrow, because you can get in trouble if you have that in your studio. So this model came into my studio, and we were doing a whole shoot, and that wasn't part of the plan. And then she picked it up, and I said, oh, that's interesting, the integration of that. So she was holding it for me. And again, this was 7, 8 years ago that I took these photos. And all of a sudden, because behind her was my studio, and I did a little watercolor of that in my studio. And then I did another one where I took everything away, and I loved the shape, that silhouetted shape. So I invented it as an outdoor. It just made this, visually, it just evoked some kind of thing, and you could read whatever you wanted to it. But I really loved the feeling that it evoked, that nature and the figure and this dead bird and what it could mean. That the wings are almost like angelic wings. You can read a million stories into it. But I'm not that deep. I just like the way it looked.
Another question. Somebody raise your hand, and Aaron, just pick somebody. There's somebody way in the back, and we'll work the microphone.
Hey,
so
Quang.
who's got the next question?
Jess.
All right, right here after that. We're going to bounce it around, okay?
Hey,
Go ahead,
Quang. Great show. So I've heard you referred to as the fastest brush in the West. You're a very quick painter. How do you make such strong visual decisions so quickly?
Strong visual decision.
I think it's a question for both of them. How do you make strong visual?
What do you mean by that exactly?
I mean, you're very fast, yet your work, it feels very intentional as far as all the elements within it. It's not like you're just not thinking about things and just putting paint down, but you're also very fast at it.
It only looks fast. Scott? Yeah, you can speak about that.
I know I paint quickly too, but I don't think about that actually.
Yeah.
I actually recently saw myself paint on a video, and I thought, man, he's going too fast.
I've
And
seen.
so-
But you don't think about it, how
No,
fast something is. It just,
No, and I'll change up the music just to change
you know, one of the
pace.
things I'm picking up is that we've got 7 or 8 and sometimes 15 years of thought
Yeah.
that goes into. How long did it take you to paint that painting? Is a question a lot of artists get asked, and I've heard artists say 62 years plus 2 weeks.
Yeah,
right? I
right,
mean,
right,
it's
right.
or it's that kind of the standard joke. You know,
Yeah.
what's your
Well, that's a good question because I've asked a lot of artists ask me, well, I love to learn how to paint expressive loosely, the way that you paint. And it only looks loose, but it's really, I never think about the brushstroke. I never think about what the brushstroke should look like. What I'm doing is actually reading the shapes, as I was telling you. So sometimes a big shape might be a paragraph, and then the brushstroke is the right word to put inside of that paragraph. So I'm using the right word to describe that shape, and sometimes that shape is one dot of paint. You know what I mean? So it's fast because I'm clear and deliberate about what I want to do, but that doesn't mean after I do that, I might change that shape again, repaint it 10 times. You know what I mean? But each time I do it, it's not like sometimes it's like driving a race car. Sometimes you're going speeding well ahead, and other times you're slowing down to just put a few brush strokes down, so.
question up here?
Yes. Scott spoke earlier about starting with a more limited palette. And Quang, I wondered if you could talk about your palette a little bit. When I look at something like the Abalone Hunters or the Floral Fantasy, I'm kind of blown away about how you manage so much color, and I wondered where you started.
Thank you. It's interesting. I was looking at your painting, Scott, here, and it looks like you probably painted that with a limited palette. But when you look at my abalone painter, it's not that much more colorful than that, right? And I used about 20 different colors in there. My palette is as chaotic as I am. I don't have a plan. I really don't. I wouldn't know what to do with a limited palette. There's artists who could use a limited palette and get this big range, and I would do it just to try it out, and then I go, oh, why am I doing this? I need more. So I would put more paint down. So that imaginary still life is because I've painted still life for my entire career, so I know how to what a flower feels and all that. So I did that just to allow myself to use colors that aren't in front of me. So I just invented stuff. And so I used the highest chroma you can see back there, pure cadmiums and that kind of thing, and then just invented a composition through that.
All right, we got a question right up here.
First of all, thank you for the show. It's really good. My question is, whenever you go plein air painting, how do you deal with things that are moving like cars or people?
Oh, that's one for
Try not to
Scott.
panic.
Try not to panic.
Truthfully, you just got to start seeing the shapes, and you got to see the drawing of everything, and you got to kind of lock that in because it's going to move, and you got to, and you're going to see that shape and try it again and try to shape until you like it. I mean, I don't, and sometimes, to be dead honest with you, I see some great shapes that I don't chase the shape. It depends on what I need out of the idea. I will look at it and go, okay, I love that cloud in the sky, let's say, and I love the shape of that cloud. The cloud's going to change in 2 seconds. And if it doesn't, it'll take 10. But you're going to get it changed, so you better either photograph it or establish your shapes. And then I'll say to myself, is that what the painting's about? Not yet. What I want is the tonality and how everything works first. How does that light of the cloud work against the blue of the sky, for instance, and against the mountain and against the foreground? How do those all relate? And I'll worry about those kind of things later when I get back in.
It's such a good question because I'm looking at Scott's 2 paintings here, and I think that what's important is to understand the premise of the painting, first of all. For example, you look at that one and you see that beautiful light lighting the back, the hills in the back, and then everything in the front is in shadow.
And for those listening and not seeing here today, that piece is called Fox Creek East, and that's the road you live on. Yeah. And one day, Scott lives on, and you said one day the light, the shadow, the tone, everything fell together, and he had to stop and had to paint it.
Yeah.
So if you're looking in the book as you're listening to the audio of this, that's Fox Creek East is the one that you're talking about with that.
Yeah.
So, but great question. Any questions? Anybody? Raise your hand. Let's just hand one here. Who's got the next question after this? All right.
Have you ever felt frustrated with your art or stuck and hopeless? And if you have, what did you do to get over that frustration?
Have I ever thought about my work sucked? And is that what you said?
No, frustrated.
Frustrated?
I thought you said that too. That's what I heard.
Oh, yeah. How do you get over it, Scott?
You started shooting shotguns recently, right?
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Those work. Fires.
Big fires work. I shoot my arrows through them. No, you definitely go through stages of, how do you get over that? You just keep going. I don't hang on to that. I never think this sucks. You know what I mean? In that sense. If it's not working, then I try to find a way to make it work. And that's how you get better. You don't. I did what's teaching. I had a student, and he was talented, but he couldn't grow as quickly as a lot of the other ones because 5 minutes into anything he started, he hated it. So the whole time, I'm like, give it a chance. You're not even giving it a chance. And he was like that the whole time. I couldn't teach him.
And I think another thing to think about is a friend of mine said, there's 3 things you never chase in life, and that is pretty women, streetcars, and good deals.
What's the third one?
Good deals.
Good deals.
And the reason why is there's always another one coming around the corner, and I think you got to look ahead of these things and start. That's a great question. Yeah.
In the one called Memoriam with the flag and the yellow rose, Daniel Gerhardt would like it because you go outside the limits and the lines. But why is the mason jar in there? For reflection only?
What's the message in there?
No, the mason jar.
The mason jar. It was holding the rose for me. I just had the rose in it. And at one point I took the rose, the whole thing just came down. I took the rose out and put it on the ground as a symbolism of fallen. And it just made for just seeing through that transparent space was, yeah.
And the painting we're talking about is in Memoriam, September 11. And it's the painting that was a late addition to this exhibition because it represented a period of time that I thought was so important.
It was right after September 11, and that event, of course, was so jarring and so shocking to me, and emotionally jarring. And I just painted that as just a letting go of that emotional, as a memoriam to the people who lost their lives innocently.
But the mason jar's in there because that's where the rose was originally.
That's right. Yeah.
It's an interesting thought. Another painting that was very personal in this exhibition is the piece called The 27-Year Feast. It's, for those of you listening, it's called 27-Year Feast, and it's a domestic scene of 3 women squatting by pots and cooking for a meal. Tell that story, Quang, real quickly about why that painting's important to you.
Yeah, very quickly. My dad was captured when I was 4, and we thought he was dead. And then we came to America and found out he was still alive because when Saigon fell in 1975, they let the prisoners of war go. And he came home and his wife and kids were gone. And he said what kept him alive in prison in all those times in the North was thinking about his wife and kids. He came home and we were gone. So he almost went mad. But he remarried and we had a whole separate life. And then when I was in 1995, I was 31. I went back to Vietnam after 20 years after I came to America and saw him again for the first time in 27 years. And that's why it's called the 27-Year Feast. He hired these 3 women to cook for 125 people, and they squatted on the ground and cooked in bent-up pots and stuff in the backyard, and I set up and painted them. And it's interesting, the composition, now that I look at it, they're not the center of focus. The pots and pans are, and they're at the top. And if you look at that painting before you go, it's really interesting. I couldn't do that now if I wanted to. It was very emotional. It was intuitive. I did the whole painting, and at the end, the smoke that you see in the painting, that was all done with one brushstroke. I dragged it from the pot in the front, and I just dragged that one brushstroke as the smoke right through the stuff behind it. And I could never do that again. I'd be too afraid. But you could see, it was just the right touch to where you could still see the things behind it, and it just like that. And
you told me that painting flowed.
Yeah.
Flowed out of your system, whereas a year earlier you'd been in France and could not paint.
I couldn't paint a thing. I was in Paris.
You were having
France.
a block of some sort.
Pretty. Yeah, it was so pretty. I couldn't paint anything. But when I went to Vietnam, back to Vietnam that time, the paintings just painted themselves. I knew how it felt. I knew what it should smell like, the whole thing. And That's an important point about my paintings. Like when I say, and Scott, seeing his work, this is him. I mean, that's Scott all over these landscapes. And for my paintings, each one is a different experience. So it has to be more than just that surface, what it looks like. It has, what do you feel about it? And I realized I can't do good paintings unless I feel deeply about either the idea or the thing that I'm painting.
We had a question right up here in front. So just, it's live. Go.
I was going to say, Quang, your paintings pretty much always have living things in them. The horses, the people, all these symbolic things. And there's a lot of mysticism that I noticed. The Three Sisters and any of these, they're just all fantasy, but yet they're very real because they're real in your mind and you put them out there. And I wanted to ask you about the horses in a minute. Scott, yours is all just these incredibly fabulous landscapes that just are like magnificent, but they're just kind of, there's life there, but it's a whole different kind of organic representation. And so I just wondered, why does one artist pick living things to paint and one paints things that are real but not living in the same way? You know what I'm saying?
I would say to me, it feels like it's living. I mean, when I see the branches hanging over this snow right here, when I'm out there, you see the snow falling off. You just feel that stroke you're talking about where you pull it up. What I've noticed is I'll get to a point in a painting sometime and I'll do those risky things. And it's all because you're in the moment and you just feel it. You just got to go. You got to go and you just do it. And so I'll do stuff like put the crazy snow falling down and then see if I like it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't try to overthink it. I just go with it and then try to see if it's going to work.
I think Scott's paintings are quite alive. I think they're breathing, the spaces. Yeah, I know what you mean.
With the exception of ducks flying in, I mean,
That's so cool.
That's just some cool things.
But then, it's all interesting. It's all interesting. Even the dead leaves on the ground in that abstract painting is very interesting to me.
We have a question here.
I hope I'm not too greedy. Actually, two questions for both of you. So for someone who's already have pretty good drawing skill, what are the top 3 practice you recommend to do to become a great painter, to grow very fast, to be a great painter? Sorry, that's number 1. Number 2, I probably been asked this question many times. How can somebody to find his or her artistic voice? Besides, we all know the building the milestone mileage, just painting a lot. But we all know that. But besides painting a lot, there's anything particular you recommend to find somebody's artistic voice? Thank you.
Such a good question. All right, Scott.
Oh, man. First one was, I think that one of the main things in growing as an artist is to face that fear more than you ever have. Just look right at it and go, I don't care. And then just keep going and try it again and put another one up and figure out doing 8 of them rather than 2. And I mean that. I mean, we think we have to just wrestle something to the ground, and sometimes you just pick up another canvas and start over and try to rethink this whole idea and try to take that fear as far away as you can and leave the judge at the door and try to start looking objectively at what you're looking at and put it together in different ways and really experiment. And to your second question, to grow too, I think you have to take risk. And the risk is very, very important to me. I think it's huge. The risk is like, I could lose this whole thing. And that's where you learn the most, because you also learn how to get them back. And you also know that I was reading about a lot of older painters, and they would talk about how every painting goes through an ugly stage. And that's, to me, them pushing and imposing their thoughts on it to the point where it just can't take anymore. You back off and you reestablish it. You can't be scared of it.
What about finding your own voice?
Finding your own voice. Oh, I think that's a huge one. I have a class that I teach that it's basically how to find the artist in you. And they'll soon find out where I'm going with this, but I'll ask them, who are your favorite painters? And then I'll say, okay, now when you're going to do this painting, I want you to think a little bit more like so-and-so. I don't see that in there. What do you mean? I'm not asking you to copy it. Think a little bit more like they do. Just try to understand this and say, look at the patterns that Gustav Bowman will put in a painting. And think about putting a pattern through there that's of just a color. And then it just reframes your thinking. And all of a sudden you're doing this, and then you go, now if you say somebody else you like, and I say, okay, Gunnar Woodforce, and you say, I really like his work. And look at the way he does things. You go over and look at it and say, I'm going to start channeling that and really the way you find yourself in painting is expand. Don't try to narrow everything down. We try to just pin it to the ground, and I think the worst thing you can do is not explore on all sides.
Wait, yeah. So I think for a really practical, after you really master drawing, the next thing that could help, and I wish somebody had told me this when I was younger, is focus on value. Because without understanding value structure really well, the colors have nowhere to go. And you can be lost with color if you don't understand value. So that system of the 3 simple values, you should watch some of Scott's videos so you can understand this. He does it so beautifully. But you can limit your color so that you can work on values. So there's a painting of a horse I have in here. It's kind of blue saddle. And it's just browns and stuff, but good drawing. And by limiting the color, all of a sudden you have more freedom to focus on your values and edges, right? Develop that, and once you're strong with your value, you'll find that just a little bit of color will make that thing sing. And then you go from there. If you see Adrian's paintings, the colors is just glorious. And I don't even have that kind of rods and cones in my head. But as far as finding your own voice, that's being authentic. That's about being yourself. And I think if you try to find a voice, it becomes false somehow. So just let it be, and in your searching, and in your honest searching, and your honest exploration, you'll find your own way of saying things that you can't fake it. It might come out or might never come out. No, it will always come out. If you're honestly searching and you're exploring without fear, you have to explore without fear. Yeah. Each time you ask a good question and you pursue it, something new, something of you emerged through. Yeah. 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 And it might be, and that might be perfect. It might be the way that you solve things.
And why not?
Yeah.
I mean,
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Then next time add paint. Just say, I'm going to do it intently.
My question is for Quang. I am intrigued with your paint application and texture, and it changes from, I think, what you're trying to say, like the cowboys in the other room, to say the abalone to the leaves. Could you speak a little bit about your process, and Scott, also with the landscape?
Yes, to me, painting is like music. Music is about sound, and painting is about paint, ultimately. I love the visceral and the way paint plays as an abstract thing, right? And sometimes I love thin paintings, like we're talking about, like a watercolor wash. And then other times I love painting where every brushstroke is a thick, chunky thing that goes down. It expresses itself that way. And then other times, some of these paintings are, I was talking to somebody yesterday about how when you're doing a bad painting and you get frustrated and you scrape it, talking about frustration, and you scrape the painting and all of a sudden it looks better. What's that about, right? So I'm like, why does that have to be like that? So I actually did that to a good painting, to a painting that I liked. And then all of a sudden, you see these beautiful interlaying, overlapping of colors that you couldn't manipulate normally. So one thing leads to another. So each painting is a different exercise it's a dance between me and the painting, and just see what paint does. And that's why I play with different surfaces too, because each one has a different quality of the way it comes out. But underneath it all, each painting structurally is the same. It's about the structure first, and then what do the colors on top say? Is it a light and shadow painting or a local tone painting? I was starting to say Scott's painting here of that, the yellow aspens there, and then this one with the piece of light. So you have to understand the initial point of the painting first, so when it moves, you still know that you're painting a cloudy day here, and that one you're painting that piece of light in the background, so keep that. Even if it changes, the shape would change, but you have that premise going on. So each one of my painting has a strong premise that I keep, and then I can paint it however I want to. See what I mean? So I play with it like that.
You want me to answer that? About Sebastian Bach, one of the things that happened to me is I realized that a lot of my paintings, I adopted thing that Bach talked about. And in his music, he said, I wanted to learn the things he did. He rewrote some things that took him 10 years to rewrite. And he took a piece of music from Vivaldi and he decided he's going to do it in a harpsichord and represent it as full orchestra on a harpsichord. It took him 10 years to rewrite it, and his whole purpose was one thing: learn how to think musically. He just wanted to learn how to think musically. So I'll pick an idea and I'll apply that to it. I'll say, I want to think, how can I? So when I look at like this one of Quang's over here, this one of the aspen trees too, he talks about it in this, when he's doing this music, he said, too much variety causes chaos and too much harmony causes boredom. But you press that variety until you think it's too much. And there's a balance in there, and how much is enough? And it's going to change every time. You can look at Quang's all the way across the wall and see he's challenging himself with that same thing. How much can the painting bear? Can it take this color red? Can it take more? It needs this red. Why? Because because all the green or whatever it is. And it's just like there's a theory and there's a thought process that goes into it, and it's all about learning how to think artistically, in my mind.
That's really great. Yes.
Yes. So this question's for both of you. How do you determine when a painting is done to your liking, finished to your liking, especially if it goes in a different direction than what you envisioned at the outset?
The eternal question. What is that great quote? A painting is never finished but abandoned. For me, when a painting is finished, which is rare that I come to a painting, I could take any of these paintings back and keep working on it a little more. Yeah. But there are a few times when a painting is finished because I feel like one more brushstroke is too much. It's like I'm going to repeat myself. You know what I mean? Like one more hard edge is one hard edge too much. Yeah. That kind of thing.
I'm going back to that Bach's Italian Concerto, where he talks about he took this thing and he'd take the music apart and he'd add things. And in these things he would add, it was infinite variety. It sounded the same, but it wasn't the same ever. But the thing that was so fascinating about it is if you first listen to it, you'll think that version is the same as that one, that's the same as that one. And then when you slow it down and watch what he did with each part of that, it was all variety every time. And that's just a big part of paying attention to not making similar marks all the time.
It's such a good question. You think about Beethoven, who wrote one of the symphonies, right? It's written down on paper. You hand it to any great musician that can play it. But each one will play it a little bit differently. You know what I mean? Each one can be interpreted differently. With that, the same thing with my painting. I'll start with the premise, and the structure is down, but I could keep working on it. I could take that thing, move it over here, and do a whole different painting of the same composition. Same like the birds here. Everything's working for me now, but I can change that into a yellowish tone, a greenish tone, high key, low key. I could do all that, and not one is necessarily better than the other, but it's just different. And so you could, sometimes a painting can be correct in 10 or 15 different ways. You know what I mean? It could be finished in so many different ways. And even when it's finished, you could still take it and move it somewhere else. You know what I mean? So,
great question. We have one back here. Go ahead.
For both of you, great show. Thank you very much. Question for Quang. 3 of your works, the racehorses back here, 2 paintings in the other room of dancers. The figures appear to move. How do you do that?
Ancient Vietnamese secret. Some of you are too young to remember that commercial. My paintings, the most important thing in my painting is the movement of shape from one place to another. So it's really about rhythm. And if you look at the dark shape and how your eye moves from one space to another. So it's really about movement. How do I do that? The thing that stops movement in a painting is repetition of shapes without realizing. Meaning, you make too many things the same size or the same value. I'm consciously leading the eye from, when you look at any spot in my painting, I'm constantly leading you from that space to another space. And that's why there's always movement.
We have time for about 2 more questions.
Okay.
So since you raised your hand first, there you go.
This gentleman here is next.
Apple painting.
Yeah.
Do you have a focal point, or you have so many apples? So how?
So many apples.
What a great question. No, there's no focal point there. And the reason why I do that on purpose. I never think about focal point. The only thing that I think about in a painting is that don't do the same thing twice. Because I've had this exercise with my students where I'll I'll show a painting and say, okay, what's the focal point? 10 people pick out 10 different spots that their eye rests on. This painting, the same as the one next to it, is called, as a concept I call equalization. And equalization is a type of painting that has no focal point. And you think about Jackson Pollock, right? Let me explain to you Jackson Pollock like I've never heard anyone else explain it, Jackson Pollock. All the great art writers talk about it, and I'm like, you're full of crap. It's not that at all. They said, well, he's great because he never used a brush to paint. Whoop-de-doo, what's so great about that? But what he did was his early paintings of figures, it started just to swirl until there was no focal point. And I think about how do you do that? So the way you think about it is like take a big salad bowl and you toss in your greens and your egg whites and your red tomatoes and your olives, all as many colors and ingredients you want. Stir it up and throw it up in the air and it goes all over the ground. And what you have is maximum randomness. But how do you paint that? There's order there. I'll show you how to do it. Ignore everything and only look for where all the red tomatoes are. And all of a sudden you see that there's a pattern there. And then ignore that and see where all the egg whites are. And you see they're never going to repeat themselves. And that's how nature works for me. But there's order in every situation. But there's no focal point, obviously, unless you have a clump of egg white right in the middle, and then that becomes the star. It's not going to happen like that, right? That's what he was doing. So his paintings, even though each color has a different pattern.
And the two paintings you're talking about are apples, which, strangely enough, does not appear in the book.
Yeah, I screwed
because
that up.
we had it in the original Dropbox, and then Quang took it out to work on it some more and rephotographed it, and the book had already gone to press.
And I forgot.
And he forgot to tell me that. But the piece that is in the book is the 1 square foot of the forest floor.
Yeah.
Painting's called A Forest Floor.
In October, in November, yeah.
So if you want to look at that randomness, that's in there.
But the key to that painting is that you can look at any color in that painting and you won't see the same shape twice. Yeah, and I'm very aware of that. If I repeat myself once, it's even with all those colors going on. And that's in that way, I understand nature works like that. And that's why, nature never repeats itself. You think it does, but it doesn't. No two snowflakes are the same size. And that's the whole idea behind. So the structure is simple. It's like just a forest floor, but don't repeat yourself. And make sure everything connects. I saw this gentleman with his hand up. Yeah.
So one more question here, and then we're going to wrap it up because we're breaking about 14 rules of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.
What's that?
We're supposed to go 30 minutes, and so we may break this into multiple sections. But anyway, yeah. Question?
I just wanted to know how, being an artist, knowing other artists, having those conversations, being in nature, traveling to see all these beautiful places, how has that changed the way you view society, our relationship to nature, just your worldview in general?
Wow. Cool. Okay.
Scott? He threw that question right at Scott quickly, didn't he? So as you're traveling throughout the country, you're seeing different things, just change your overall view.
Well, I go purposely, I go to different places to actually see the differences and experience what is different from Norway versus New Zealand versus just the foliage alone, the rocks. Everything is different, the textures. And I see that, and I'll go there, actually, like when I went to Norway, I would look at it and say, what is different? What is the thing I want to take home from Norway that's really Norway? And that's what I'll do with it. I'll just try to take that stuff. And so what I found was just the way everything was completely different. The connectivity of the trees were different. The shapes were different. The tonality of everything was different. And what I would not allow myself to do is finish any one painting. So I came back from Norway with 72 studies. And those were just ideas. I wanted to see it initially, how I saw it, and not try to overthink everything, but just get to the core of what it was that was interesting to me and different about Norway. And that's just a simple overall when I'm going to some place to paint. But overall, then it gets into the philosophy of painting. But yeah, where do I want to go with it?
So what's your worldview?
Worldview.
That's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah.
That was a politician's answer right there. You could have danced all around that. But.
My worldview.
I could tell you, we're a couple of conspiracy theorists, just so you know.
I think being an artist will do that to you.
The worldview is, I think, when you take God out of the picture, you have a different world. And I think we're all facing that in this country, and that's what I think. And I think when you keep God in this thing, you're going to have a different answer for why we should make America.
And the heaviest question of the afternoon comes at the very end with that.
Yeah.
One last opportunity. People out there who are not in the audience tonight want to see more of your works. Real quickly, your websites, your things for social media. How do they reach out? How do they see more Quang Ho, Scott Christensen?
Yeah, Scott has this teaching format that I would love to talk to you. You should look it up. But I also have, if you're interested in learning more about what I think about painting, I have 30 videos that I have on this site called mfa.studio, and you can join like $30 a month.
And we'll put a link. We'll put a link to that out there. It is a subscription website.
Yeah.
So,
but I'm going to turn it into a format where you can buy individual videos too if you don't want to subscribe to it. But it's great because it's not just me. Adrian has a video on there. Kevin has a McPherson, all kinds of people. But you can learn. I think you can learn so much from these kind of things. And my website, quangho.com, for what it's worth. But what else is there? I'm on Facebook and Instagram, so you can always contact me on that. It's more about Liam videos than my paintings, but it's. But I want to say one thing to answer your question. Adrian said, "Are you excited to come to the show here?" And I said, "Not really, in the sense that the excitement has already been done in the paintings, and I didn't know what to expect here, and so I didn't want to have any anticipation." And I was so touched last night and right now for the amount of just y'all who showed up and the love that you showed us and the attention you gave to the paintings. And for Darrell drove to Idaho, picked up all of Scott's paintings. Then he drove to Denver and picked up all of my paintings.
That's because I don't trust the common carriers in this world.
I know, but still.
Your problem is you told us the reason. They threw him out.
Well, the real reason I went to see Scott in Quang is because they just happen to live in places where I could fly fish along the way. So I kind of worked at a little working vacation with it. But the main reason was shipping cost was through the roof. And we just simply had to have a way to assure the works were here in one piece each.
Yeah. But all that to say how much we appreciate you all for being here. And my worldview is that I don't know who y'all voted for, and I don't give a shit. You know what I mean? And I agree with Scott in this sense that God is in this. And what is God but love, right? It's not fear. It's not all this other stuff. Well, we can go down that path for a while. But ultimately, it's really an amazing thing to make a connection with another human being like this. And you go to different countries, too. They have their different language and their different customs, which sometimes can be jarring to our own personal way of seeing things. And what I realize is going to all different places that I leave my expectations behind because it doesn't fit, because that's just the narrow slice of perception. And the world is way richer than what I think or believe in that sense.
Yeah, at Quang Ho and quangho.com.
Quangho.com, but the other one is mfa.studio.
And mfa.studio. We'll have those links at the bottom of the webpage. And for Scott?
It's christensenstudio.com and adventureofpainting.com.
Adventure of Painting, and I recommend highly both of those sites. Both of these gentlemen have put the last 4 years of their lives a lot on hold to paint for what I believe is one of the top shows we've ever had at the Museum of Western Art. And gentlemen, on behalf of the board of directors, the staff, our volunteer corps, we've had such joy in putting this together. I do want to thank Herman and Deanne Walker and Katie and Judy, and gosh, Judy, and I could go through our entire list because everybody, putting this show together was a nightmare because the work is also good. Which one do you feature? Which ones do you put on which wall? But then laying it all out was such a pleasure because everybody was just such in love. And if they weren't Scott Christensen and Quang Ho fans before they saw this work, they are now. And so thank you guys for the podcast today on It's Art, Let's Talk About It. We appreciate that. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so
Darrell.
much.
Thank you, guys.
We appreciate it.
And let me.
Thank you.
And of course, I want to do an opportunity. Books are for sale. in the museum store, $22 plus tax. Get them now while you can. And they're going to be in town a little while longer, not much, because there's some airplane flights to catch. But you can maybe get them signed. Thank you for coming to the Museum of Western Art. Thank you for coming today. And ladies and gentlemen, one last round of applause for Scott Christensen and Quang Ho. Thank you. And It's Art has been a production of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network in Kerrville, Texas. Come see the Museum of Western Art at museumofwesternart.com.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of It's Art, Let's Talk About It, a production of the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. We hope you'll visit the museum in person. We're located at 1550 Bandera Highway in Kerrville, Texas. Find out more about us by going to www.museumofwesternart.com. And we hope you'll join us next time for It's Art, Let's Talk About It. The podcast is produced by the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.